A millionaire disguises himself as a garbage man to test his son's fiancée, and what she says leaves him speechless. In the luxurious mansion of the Anderson family, Edward, a discreet multi-millionaire of 60 years, carefully observed the family portrait hanging in his elegant study. His eyes, tired but penetrating, fixed on the image of Jason, his 28-year-old adopted son. The news Jason had given him that morning still echoed in his mind. He was getting married. Edward poured himself a glass of aged whiskey and sat in his leather armchair deep in thought. The future bride, Olivia Taylor, was a 25-year-old model and influencer known for her glamorous lifestyle and success on social media. Jason was convinced that Olivia was the woman of his life, but Edward, although he wanted his son's happiness, felt a shadow of doubt from the first moment he heard about her. "Are you sure about this, son?" Edward had asked that morning, trying to hide his concern. "Completely, Dad," Jason replied with a radiant smile. She's simply perfect. We'll be married in 3 months." Edward nodded, forcing a smile. "If that's what you want, you have my support." Now, in the solitude of his study, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't fit. He had spent his life learning to judge people beyond appearances. He had always known that human intentions could be disguised with charm and ambition, and something in Jason's description of Olivia didn't seem genuine to him. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the impeccably manicured gardens of the mansion. Was Olivia a sincere woman with true feelings, or an opportunist attracted by the fortune and prestige of the Andersons? The doubt gnawed at him. Edward made a decision. He needed to meet Olivia, but not as the powerful businessman he was. He needed to see her in a different context, where his wealth and status wouldn't influence her behavior. He called his butler, a man who had been in his service for decades and in whom he trusted completely. "James," Edward said with determination, "I need your help with a delicate matter." The butler nodded, waiting for instructions. "I'm going to meet Jason's fiancée," Edward continued, "but not as myself. I need a disguise, something that makes me look like a common man, maybe even someone looking for work." James raised an eyebrow, surprised, but didn't question his boss's decision. "I understand, sir. I'll take care of getting everything necessary." As James withdrew to carry out the assigned task, Edward looked again at the family portrait. His gaze lingered on the image of his late wife, Sarah. "What would you do in my place, dear?" he murmured. "How would you protect our Jason?" The silence of the room was his only answer. Edward knew he was about to embark on a risky plan, but he was determined to discover the truth about Olivia before his son made a mistake that could cost him his happiness. With one last glance at the portrait, Edward left his study ready to begin his transformation. What he didn't know was that this plan would not only change his appearance, but would trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of his family and reveal long-buried secrets. The next morning, Edward found himself in front of the mirror in his private dressing room, barely recognizing the man who stared back at him. James had done an exceptional job with the disguise. The elegant businessman had disappeared, replaced by a common man worn down by time. A scruffy beard covered much of his face, hiding his distinctive features. His hair, normally perfectly groomed, was messy and dyed a grayish tone. The clothes he wore were several sizes too big, giving him a disheveled appearance, a faded shirt, worn-out pants, and old shoes. "Impressive, James," Edward murmured, turning to see himself from all angles. "I don't even recognize myself." The butler nodded, satisfied with his work. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, sir?" Edward turned to him, his gaze reflecting an unshakable determination. "It's necessary, James. I need to know who Olivia Taylor really is before she becomes part of our family." As Edward prepared to leave, he mentally reviewed the plan. Thanks to James's preliminary investigation, he knew that Olivia would be having lunch that day at the Terrace, a luxury restaurant in the city center. His intention was to approach her there, pretending to be looking for a job. Before leaving, Edward stopped in front of the family portrait one more time. "Forgive me, Jason," he whispered. "I hope you understand that I'm doing this for your own good." With one last glance at his unrecognizable reflection, Edward left the mansion through the service door, avoiding being seen by the rest of the staff. He got into an old car that James had obtained for the occasion and headed to the city centre. Upon arriving at the terrace, Edward felt a mixture of nerves and determination. He observed from a distance as Olivia arrived at the restaurant, looking impeccable in a designer dress and brand-name sunglasses. Her presence attracted all eyes, and she seemed to enjoy the attention. Taking a deep breath, Edward approached the restaurant entrance. The maitre d' looked at him with disdain, clearly uncomfortable with his presence. "Excuse me, sir," said the maitre d' in a sharp tone. "This is a private establishment. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Edward, adopting a hoarse and humble voice, and replied, "Please, sir, I'm just looking for work. Don't you need help in the kitchen or with cleaning?" The commotion caught Olivia's attention, who turned to observe the scene. Edward took the opportunity to approach her. "Miss," he said, addressing Olivia, "do you work here? Do you know if they're hiring?" Olivia's reaction was immediate and cutting. Her face, which moments before had been smiling for the paparazzi cameras, transformed into a grimace of disgust. "Me? Work here?" she responded with disdain. "Please, get away from me. This is no place for someone like you. Maybe you should look for a job more suitable to your level. Have you considered picking up trash on the streets?" Olivia's words were like a dagger to Edward. Although he was prepared for a negative reaction, the cruelty of her response left him momentarily speechless. "I'm sorry, miss," he finally muttered, lowering his head. "I didn't mean to bother you." As he walked away, he heard Olivia complaining to the maitre d' about the scum they were letting into the restaurant. Edward's heart sank. His suspicions seemed to be confirmed, but he knew he would need more evidence before confronting Jason. Back in his car, Edward removed the fake beard and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Sadness and disappointment were reflected in his eyes. How could his son be in love with someone so cruel? He decided he would need to keep investigating. This was just the tip of the iceberg, and he was determined to uncover Olivia Taylor's true nature, no matter how painful the process might be. As he drove back to the mansion, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to unearth secrets that would forever change the fate of the Anderson family. In the days following his encounter with Olivia at the restaurant, Edward immersed himself in a silent but thorough investigation. From the comfort of his study, he observed Olivia's movements through social media and the reports that James discreetly provided him. One afternoon, while reviewing recent photographs from a fashion event that Olivia had attended, something caught his attention. In several images, always in the background, appeared a young and attractive man. It didn't seem to be a coincidence. His presence was constant, although always maintaining a certain distance from Olivia. "James," Edward called to his butler, "have you noticed this man in Olivia's photos?" James approached and examined the images. "Yes, sir. I've been investigating. His name is Ethan Hayes, a fairly well-known fashion photographer in the local scene." Edward frowned, intrigued. "A photographer? Interesting. He seems to always be close to her, but never officially together." "That's right, sir," James confirmed. "I've noticed they exchange glances at various events, but never interact publicly." Edward's mind began to work at full speed. Who was this Ethan really? What role did he play in Olivia's life? He needed more information. "James, I want you to hire a private investigator," Edward ordered. "We need to know more about the relationship between Olivia and this Ethan." As James withdrew to carry out the order, Edward approached the window of his study. Outside her in the mansion's gardens, he saw Jason walking with his phone in hand, smiling as he talked, probably with Olivia. The image of his son, so happy and unaware of the shadows hanging over his relationship, caused a pang of pain. Days passed, and information began to arrive. The private investigator had managed to intercept messages between Olivia and Ethan. What Edward read left him cold. "Soon, my love," said a message from Olivia. "When I have the ring on my finger and access to the Anderson fortune, nothing will be able to separate us." Ethan's response was equally revealing. "Be patient, darling. Our plan is working perfectly. That fool Jason suspects nothing." Edward collapsed into his armchair, overwhelmed by the evidence. His worst fears were confirmed. Olivia was not only an opportunist, but she was also cheating on Jason with Ethan. However, as he continued reading the messages, Edward noticed something else. Behind the plans and manipulations, there was a tone of true emotion in the exchanges between Olivia and Ethan. It wasn't just a cold, calculated plan. There were real feelings involved. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the situation. Olivia wasn't simply a one-dimensional villain. She was a woman trapped between ambition and true love, willing to do anything to be with the man she really loved. Edward rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. How could he reveal this truth to Jason without breaking his heart? And what implications would this have for the future of the Anderson family? As he contemplated his next steps, Edward couldn't help but feel that he was on the edge of a precipice. The decisions he would make in the coming days would not only affect Jason and Olivia, but could change the course of their lives forever. With renewed determination, Edward stood up and headed towards the hidden safe behind a painting in his study. As he opened it, he took out an old and dusty folder. It was time to face some ghosts from the past, he thought. Perhaps there he would find the answers he needed to protect his family and unmask the truth. What Edward didn't know was that the secrets contained in that folder were about to trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about his family and about himself. The Anderson mansion buzzed with activity. The gardens, illuminated with thousands of soft lights, had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. It was the night of the annual masquerade ball organized by the family, a charity event that brought together the most select members of society. Edward, dressed in an elegant black suit and a golden Venetian mask, observed from the top of the main staircase. His gaze scanned the ballroom, searching among the masked crowd for the central figures of his investigation: Jason, Olivia, and Ethan. He didn't take long to locate Jason, who was wearing a white suit and a silver mask. His adopted son moved gracefully among the guests, greeting and chatting, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. By his side, resplendent in a scarlet-red dress and an elaborate feathered mask, was Olivia. Her beauty was undeniable, and the way she moved alongside Jason seemed that of a perfectly in-love couple. Edward felt a pang of pain seeing his son's apparent happiness. How could he destroy that illusion with the truth he had discovered? His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed a familiar figure moving along the edge of the ballroom. Ethan, dressed in black and with a simple mask covering only his eyes, moved like a shadow, his camera in hand, apparently working as the event's photographer. But Edward knew that his presence had a much more personal purpose. Determined to observe more closely, Edward descended the stairs and mingled with the guests. He moved cautiously, always keeping Olivia and Ethan in his field of vision. It didn't take long before he noticed the furtive glances exchanged between them, the accidental brushes when Ethan passed nearby to take a photograph. At one point during the night, Edward saw Olivia excuse herself to Jason and head towards one of the balconies. Seconds later, Ethan discreetly followed her. With his heart racing, Edward approached, hiding behind nearby curtains. "Ethan, be careful," he heard Olivia's whispering voice. "Someone could see us." "I can't help it," Ethan responded quietly. "Seeing you with him, it's killing me, Liv. I know, my love, but soon, very soon, we'll be together. We just need to be patient a little longer." Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the confirmation of his suspicions. But what he heard next left him frozen. "Sometimes," Olivia continued, "I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Jason he's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." Ethan's voice turned hard. "Have you forgotten why we're doing this? Have you forgotten what his family did to yours?" "No, I haven't forgotten," Olivia replied with a sigh. "But sometimes I think that maybe there's another way." "There isn't," Ethan interrupted. "The Andersons destroyed your family. This is our chance for revenge and to secure our future. Don't lose your nerve now." Edward was paralyzed. Revenge? What had the Andersons done to Olivia's family? His mind worked at full speed, trying to remember some event from the past that could explain this revelation. Before he could fully process what he had heard, the conversation on the balcony ended. Olivia and Ethan separated, returning to the party by different paths. Edward remained in his hiding place, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The situation was much more complex than he had imagined. Not only was his son's heart at stake, but there seemed to be a deeper and darker story behind Olivia's actions. As he watched Olivia return to Jason's side, smiling and acting as if nothing had happened, Edward made a decision. He needed to get to the bottom of this story. What secret from the past connected the Andersons with Olivia's family? And how could he unravel this web of lies and revenge without destroying everyone in the process? With renewed determination, Edward moved away from the curtains and immersed himself in the party. He had much to investigate, and time was running out. The fate of his family hung by a thread, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The days following the masquerade ball were a whirlwind of activity for Edward. Locked in his study, he immersed himself in old family documents, business records, and ancient newspaper clippings. The folder he had taken from the safe the night before the ball lay open on his desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. James entered and exited silently, bringing coffee and food that Edward barely touched, too absorbed in his research. The butler observed with growing concern as his boss consumed himself in this obsessive search for the truth. It was on the afternoon of the third day when Edward finally found something. Among the papers in the folder, a yellowed envelope that he had overlooked before. With trembling hands, he opened it and pulled out a handwritten letter. The elegant calligraphy was familiar to him. It was from Sarah, his late wife. As he read, the color drained from his face. The letter, dated a few months before they adopted Jason, revealed a secret that Sarah had taken to her grave. "My dear Edward, there's something I must confess to you. Something I've held in my heart for years out of fear of losing you. Before our marriage, I had a brief but intense relationship. From that relationship, a girl was born, our daughter. In my youth and desperation, unable to raise the child alone and fearing your rejection, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I gave her up for adoption. I have lived with this weight for years, silently observing as we built our life together, as we adopted our dear Jason. But now, with my health deteriorating, I feel I must release this truth. Our daughter is out there, Edward. I don't know her name or where she is, but she carries our blood. I hope that someday you find in your heart the strength to look for her and, perhaps, to forgive me. With all my love, Sarah." Edward dropped the letter, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had a daughter he never knew, who grew up without knowing who her true parents were. The implications of this revelation hit him like a wave. Suddenly, a terrible idea began to form in his mind. The dates, the age, everything fit together in a way that chilled his blood. With his heart racing wildly, Edward frantically searched through the papers until he found the file he had compiled on Olivia. He compared the dates, the places, the scattered details he had gathered about her past. With each piece that fit, the horrible truth became clearer. "No," Edward whispered, collapsing into his armchair. "It can't be." But it was. All the evidence pointed to an inevitable conclusion. Olivia, the woman who was about to marry Jason, the woman who planned to take revenge on the Anderson family, was his biological daughter. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. Edward found himself laughing hysterically, then crying, his mind struggling to process the cruel irony of fate. The woman he had so despised, whom he had investigated like a criminal, was actually his own daughter, Sarah's lost child. What now? How could he confront Jason with this truth? How could he prevent his adopted son from marrying his biological half-sister? And more importantly, how could he approach Olivia, reveal the truth about her origin, without destroying the lives of everyone involved? Edward rose unsteadily and approached the window. Outside, the sun was setting, tinting the sky blood red. He felt he was on the edge of an abyss, with the fate of his entire family hanging on his next decisions. With trembling hands, he took his phone and dialed Jason's number. "Son," he said when Jason answered, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk. It's urgent." As he hung up, Edward knew that nothing would ever be the same. The truth, so long buried, was about to come to light, and its consequences would shake the foundations of the Anderson family forever. The tension in Edward's study was palpable. Jason, seated across from his adoptive father, watched with growing concern as the man who had always been a pillar of strength and security seemed to crumble before his eyes. "Dad, you're scaring me," said Jason, leaning forward. "What's going on?" Edward took a deep breath, searching for the right words. How do you tell a son that the woman he loves is, in fact, his half-sister? "Jason," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "what I'm about to tell you will change everything. But I need you to listen to me until the end, please." With each word that came out of Edward's mouth, Jason's face went from confusion to shock, and finally to a mixture of horror and disbelief. The revelation about Olivia, about her true identity and her plans, fell on him like an avalanche. "No," Jason muttered, standing up abruptly. "It can't be true. Olivia loves me. She would never—" "Son, I know it's hard to believe," Edward interrupted, his voice laden with pain. "But I have proof. The messages between her and Ethan, the investigation into her past, your mother's letter." Jason backed away, shaking his head. "Are you telling me that you've been spying on my fiancée, that you disguised yourself to trick her, and now you come out with this story that she's your daughter, my sister? This is madness, Dad." Before Edward could respond, the study door burst open. Olivia entered. And revelations. Olivia cornered, finally confessed her plan for revenge, but vehemently denied any knowledge of her true parentage. "Do you think if I had known you were my father, I would have gone ahead with this?" she shouted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All my life I've believed that the Andersons destroyed my family, that because of you, I grew up without parents, jumping from one foster home to another." Jason, pale and shaking, collapsed into an armchair. "I can't believe it," he murmured. Everything has been a lie." Edward took a step towards Olivia, his heart torn between the pain of deception and an unexpected paternal instinct. "Olivia, I know you have every right to hate me, to hate us, but you have to believe me when I tell you that we never knew of your existence until now. Your mother, my late wife. She made the decision to give you up for adoption without telling me." Olivia looked at him, her eyes a mixture of confusion, pain, and a spark of something else. Hope. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because," Edward replied, pulling Sarah's letter from his pocket, "I have proof, and because, despite everything, you are my daughter, our daughter, and I want the opportunity to get to know you, to make amends for the mistakes of the past." Silence fell over the room again, heavy and laden with contained emotions. Jason looked alternately at his father and the woman he until recently believed would be his wife, trying to process the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Olivia, for her part, seemed to be waging an internal battle. Years of resentment and plans for revenge faced the sudden revelation of her true origin and the possibility of a family she never believed she had. It was at that moment that the door opened again. Ethan entered, his face a mask of concern. "Olivia, what's going on?" He stopped short at the scene before him. Edward looked at him, recognizing him from the masquerade ball and the photographs. "You must be Ethan," he said in a tired voice. "I think it's better if you join us. There's a lot to talk about." As Ethan cautiously entered the room, closing the door behind him, Edward couldn't help but think about how surreal the situation was. In that room now were all the pieces of the puzzle he had been trying to solve for weeks. "What's going on here?" Ethan asked, his gaze moving from Olivia to Jason and finally to Edward. Olivia, with tears still running down her cheeks, was the first to speak. "Ethan, everything has fallen apart. They know everything." Ethan's face paled. "What do you mean by everything?" Edward stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We know about your revenge plan, Mr. Hayes. We know about your relationship with Olivia and how you plan to use my son to access the Anderson fortune." Ethan seemed to shrink at Edward's words, but quickly composed himself. "You don't understand," he said, his voice mixing defiance and desperation. "You don't know what your family did to Olivia's, what you did to all of us." "Then explain it to me," Edward replied, sitting in his armchair and inviting the others to do the same. "Because I believe there's a lot that we all need to understand." For the next hour, the room was filled with revelations and confessions. Ethan, his voice breaking at times, recounted how his family and Olivia's had been minor partners in one of the Andersons' first businesses. He spoke of a deal gone wrong, of accusations of fraud, and how, within months, both families lost everything while the Andersons prospered. "Our parents lost everything," Ethan said, squeezing Olivia's hand. "Mine never recovered, and Olivia, she ended up in the adoption system, bouncing from one family to another." Edward listened, his face a mask of pain and regret. "I had no idea," he murmured. "That was before I joined the family business. But that doesn't justify what you did, what you were planning to do." "And what did you expect us to do?" Olivia burst out. "To just forget and forgive. You destroyed our lives." "But I'm not responsible for that," Jason shouted, rising from his seat. "I'm not even an Anderson by blood. I'm adopted, for God's sake. How could you do this to me?" "Olivia, I loved you, I love you." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked at Jason, and for the first time since this confrontation began, she seemed truly remorseful. "Jason, I'm sorry. I didn't expect to fall in love with you. That wasn't part of the plan." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Some plan it turned out to be, huh? Years of preparation for everything to crumble in one night." Edward, Chat Duo, who had been processing all this information in silence, finally spoke. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. All eyes turned to him. "Olivia, you are my biological daughter." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Ethan jumped to his feet, while Olivia remained paralyzed, her eyes wide open. "What?" she finally managed to articulate. That can't be true." Edward handed her Sarah's letter. "Your mother. My late wife gave you up for adoption without telling me. I just discovered it a few days ago." Olivia took the letter with trembling hands, reading it over and over as tears began to fall down her cheeks again. Ethan embraced her, looking at Edward with a mixture of confusion and wariness. Jason, for his part, seemed to have entered a kind of shock. "So, Olivia is my sister," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Silence fell over the room again, each of its occupants lost in their own thoughts and emotions. The revenge plan, the engagement, the family secrets, everything had become intertwined in a complex web from which it seemed impossible to escape without someone getting hurt. Edward slowly stood up, walking to the window. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, marking the start of a new day. He turned to the others, his face showing renewed determination. "We have made many mistakes," he said. "All of us. But perhaps this is an opportunity to start anew, to heal old wounds and build something new." He looked at Olivia, his eyes full of an emotion he had never felt before. "Olivia, I know I have no right to ask you anything, but if you're willing, I'd like the opportunity to get to know you, to be the father I never could be." Then he turned to Ethan. "And to you, Mr. Hayes. I offer my help to investigate what really happened with our families in the past. If there were injustices, we'll correct them." Finally, he looked at Jason, his adopted son, the young man he had raised and loved for so many years. "Jason, my son, I know this is difficult, but I hope you can find in your heart the strength to forgive and to accept Olivia as the sister she is." The silence that followed was long and charged with emotions. Each of them was at a crossroads, facing decisions that would change their lives forever. Olivia was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. I need time to process all of this, but maybe we could try." Ethan nodded slowly. "If you're really willing to investigate the past and make things right, then I'm willing to try too." Jason, still pale and visibly shocked, simply nodded. I I need to be alone for a while, but I won't leave." He was determined not to waste it. The days that followed the dramatic confrontation in Edward's study were tense and filled with uncertainty. The Anderson mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, now seemed like an emotional battlefield where each member of this newly discovered family struggled to find their place. Olivia, overwhelmed by the revelation of her true origin, had decided to temporarily move into one of the guest houses on the property. She needed space to process everything that had happened, to reconcile the image of the enemy she had built in her mind with the reality of Edward as her biological father. Edward, who, for his part, struggled between his desire to get closer to his newly discovered daughter and respect for the space she needed. Every morning, without fail, he sent her a text message. "Good morning, Olivia. I hope you slept well. I'm here if you need anything." At first, the messages went unanswered. But gradually, day by day, Olivia began to respond, first with simple thank yous, then with brief updates about her day. It was slow progress, but Edward treasured it as the precious gift it was. Jason, on the other hand, had decided to immerse himself in work. He spent long hours at the office, avoiding the mansion and the complicated family dynamics that now inhabited it. The discovery that Olivia, the woman he loved, "About what happened to our families," Edward nodded, indicating for Ethan to take a seat. "Of course. I've been reviewing the company's old files. It's complicated, but I think we're making progress." Ethan sat down, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Have you found anything concrete?" "Some things," Edward replied cautiously. "It seems there were irregularities in the contracts, hidden clauses that harmed your families. I'm working with the lawyers to determine exactly what happened and how we can rectify it." Ethan nodded slowly, processing the information. "And what about Olivia? How is she?" The question surprised Edward. Despite everything that had happened, it was evident that Ethan's feelings for Olivia were genuine. "She's adapting," Edward answered honestly. "It's difficult for all of us, but I think she's starting to open up a little." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. "I love her, Mr. Anderson. Despite everything that's happened, despite our plans, my feelings for her are real." Edward looked at the young man before him, seeing not the conspirator who had planned to take revenge on his family, but a man in love and lost. "I know, Ethan, and I believe she loves you too. But we need to give her time and space to process all of this." Just at that moment, the study door burst open. Jason entered, stopping short when he saw Ethan. "What's he doing here?" Jason asked, his voice laden with resentment. "Jason," Edward began, rising from his chair. "Ethan came to talk about the investigation. We're trying to make things right." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "Make things right? How are we supposed to fix this, Dad? He and Olivia planned to deceive me, use me, and now it turns out Olivia is my sister. How do you fix something like that?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken emotions and still fresh wounds. It was Ethan who finally broke it. "I'm sorry, Jason," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know it probably doesn't mean anything to you, but I truly am sorry. We never meant for things to go this far." Jason looked at Ethan, then at his father. The anger in his eyes mixed with deep pain. "I need time," he finally said. I can't deal with this right now." With those words, Jason left the study, leaving Edward and Ethan in an uncomfortable silence. Edward collapsed into his chair, feeling the weight of the situation on his shoulders. "This is going to take time," he murmured, more to himself than to Ethan. "I know," Ethan replied, "but I'm willing to wait, to do whatever is necessary to make things right, for Olivia, for all of us." Edward looked at the young man, seeing in him a determination that mirrored his own. "Then let's work together," he said, extending his hand, "to heal the wounds of the past and build a better future." Ethan took Edward's hand, sealing a silent pact. As they shook hands, both knew that the road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and complicated emotions. But they also knew it was a road worth traveling. Outside, in the mansion's gardens, Olivia walked alone, lost in her thoughts. She looked towards the window of the study, seeing the silhouettes of Edward and Ethan. A small smile formed on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. The afternoon sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Edward's study, illuminating the dust floating in the air. On the mahogany desk, piles of old documents and yellowed folders formed a paper maze. Edward, with pronounced dark circles under his eyes and disheveled hair, scrutinized each page with an almost feverish intensity. By his side, equally absorbed in the task, was Ethan. The last few weeks had seen an uncomfortable truce between them, united by the common goal of uncovering the truth about the past. "Look at this," Edward suddenly said, pointing to a document. "It's a contract dated 30 years ago. The signature, it's my father's." Ethan leaned in to get a better look. "What does it say?" Edward read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. "Partnership agreement between Anderson Enterprises and Taylor Hayes Investments. The terms here are completely different from what was implemented. There are hidden clauses, conditions that were never publicly mentioned." Ethan paled. "Oh, that means—" "It means we were right," Edward completed, running a hand over his face. "My father deceived your families. He made them sign something they didn't fully understand." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with implications. Years of resentment and plans for revenge suddenly seemed justified, at least in part. "I need a moment," Ethan muttered, abruptly standing up and leaving the study. Edward was left alone, staring at the document that had shattered the image he had of his father. How could he reconcile the man who had raised him, who had taught him about business ethics, with this act of betrayal? A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Olivia. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice laden with uncertainty. Edward nodded, indicating for her to enter. "Olivia, we just discovered something important." As Edward explained what they had found, he saw how Olivia's face went from surprise to sadness, and then to a strange mixture of vindication and regret. "So we weren't wrong," Olivia finally said. "Our revenge, it had foundation." Edward looked at her, feeling a lump in his throat. "Yes, but that doesn't justify what you were planning to do. Two wrongs don't make a right, Olivia." Olivia nodded slowly. "I know. It's just that, for so long, this idea of revenge was the only thing that kept me going. And now you have the opportunity to build something new," Edward completed softly. "We all do." They looked at each other for a moment, father and daughter, united by a bond of blood, but separated by years of secrets and resentments. "What are we going to do now?" Olivia asked. Edward sighed deeply. "The right thing. We're going to correct the mistakes of the past, compensate the affected families, including yours, and then we'll try to rebuild." "As a family," Olivia nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I'd like that." Just then Jason entered the study, stopping short when he saw Olivia. The tension in the air was palpable. "I'm sorry," Jason muttered, turning to leave. "Wait," Olivia called out. "Jason, please, I think you should hear this too." Jason hesitated for a moment before re-entering, maintaining a cautious distance. Edward proceeded to explain what they had discovered, watching as his adopted son's face went through a range of emotions. "I can't believe it," Jason finally said. "All this time." "I know," Edward responded. "It's a lot to process, but I think it's an opportunity for all of us to heal and start anew." Jason looked at Olivia, then at his father. "And what about us? Olivia and me, I mean." Olivia stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Jason, what I felt for you, part of it was real. But now, knowing what we know, we have to accept that our future together can't be as we had planned." Jason nodded slowly, the pain evident in his eyes. "I know. It's just that it's hard to let go of that dream." Edward observed his two children, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. "Maybe we can't have the future we imagined," he said, "but we can build a new one. Together." At that moment, Ethan re-entered the study. He stopped when he saw everyone gathered, the tension in the air almost tangible. I'm sorry, Ethan began. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Edward said. In fact, I think it's good that we're all here. We have a lot to discuss and many decisions to make. The four looked at each other, each carrying the weight of their own emotions and expectations. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since this whole situation had begun, there was a feeling of hope in the air. So, Olivia said, breaking the silence, where do we start? Edward smiled softly. We start with the truth, the whole truth, and then, step by step, we rebuild as a family. As the sun began to set outside the study window, the four sat down, ready to face together the truths of the past and the possibilities of the future. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the Anderson family's story, one full of challenges, but also of hope and redemption. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The Anderson mansion, once the stage for secrets and conspiracies, had transformed into a place of healing and reconciliation. It wasn't an easy process, but each small step was a victory in itself. Edward had made the difficult decision to make public the fraud committed by his father decades ago. The news shook the business world and temporarily tarnished the Anderson name, but Edward remained firm in his commitment to truth and rectitude. One sunny morning, Edward was on the terrace, enjoying his morning coffee when Olivia joined him. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself a cup. "How's everything going with the press?" Edward sighed. "It's a circus, as expected, but we're handling it as best we can. The important thing is that we're doing the right thing." Olivia nodded, a small smile on her lips. "You know, when I was planning my revenge, I never imagined I'd end up admiring the man I thought was my enemy." Edward looked at her, feeling a wave of paternal affection. "And I never imagined that the woman I thought was a threat to my family would become such an important part of it." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, interrupted by Jason's arrival. The young man had gone through his own internal struggle, trying to reconcile his past feelings for Olivia with the new reality of their sibling relationship. "Hey," Jason greeted, joining them on the terrace. "Have you seen the news? They're talking about us again." "Anything bad?" Edward asked, concerned. Jason shook his head. "Surprisingly, no. They're praising the company's transparency and how we're handling the situation. It seems your strategy is working, Dad." Edward smiled, relieved. "It's good to know not everything is negative. Speaking of positive things, how's the foundation project going?" Jason's face lit up. After discovering the truth about the family's past, he had decided to channel his energy into something positive. Along with Olivia, he had begun working on a foundation to help young people in adoption situations, inspired by Olivia's story. "It's going very well," Jason replied enthusiastically. "Olivia and I have been visiting several foster homes. It's hard to see the conditions some children live in, but it feels good to be able to do something about it." Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "It's as if everything we went through now has a purpose. We're using our experience to help others." Edward looked at both of them with pride. Despite all the pain and confusion, his children had found a way to create something beautiful out of adversity. At that moment, Ethan appeared on the terrace, a camera hanging from his neck. "Good morning, everyone," he greeted, still a bit uncomfortable in the family dynamic. "Ethan," Edward greeted him warmly. "Ready for today's photo session?" Ethan nodded. As part of his own path to redemption, he had offered his photography skills to document the foundation's work and create an awareness campaign. "Yes, all set. Olivia, Jason, are you ready?" Both nodded, rising to follow Ethan. Before leaving, Olivia turned to Edward. "Will you come with us, Dad?" she asked, the last word still sounding a bit strange on her lips, but becoming more natural. Edward felt his heart swell with emotion. "Of course, daughter. I wouldn't miss it for the world." As the four prepared to leave, Edward couldn't help but reflect on how much things had changed. Just a few months ago, this scene would have been unthinkable. Now, although there were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild, it felt like a real family. The path to redemption was long and sometimes difficult, but with each passing day, with each small gesture of love and understanding, Edward knew they were on the right track. As they left the mansion together, ready to face the world and make a difference, Edward felt a deep gratitude. Despite all the secrets and pain, they had found their way to truth and love, and that, he thought, was the greatest treasure a family could have. The grand hall of the Anderson mansion buzzed with activity. Elegant decorations adorned the walls, and the aroma of fresh flowers filled the air. It was the day of the annual charity gala, but this year it had a special significance. Not only did it mark the official launch of the Anderson Taylor Foundation for Youth in Adoption, but it was also a celebration of the transformation the family had undergone in the past year. Edward, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, observed the scene from a quiet corner. His heart swelled with pride as he watched Olivia and Jason move among the guests, passionately explaining the foundation's goals. Seeing them work together, as the siblings they were, filled him with a joy he never thought possible. Ethan, for his part, moved around the hall with his camera, capturing precious moments that would serve both for family memory and for promoting the foundation. From time to time, his eyes met Olivia's, and a knowing smile formed on their faces. Their relationship had evolved, maturing from a passion fueled by revenge to a deeper and more genuine love, forged in adversity and redemption. It's a wonderful night, isn't it? The voice of Dr. Lisa Thompson, the family therapist who had been instrumental in the Andersons' healing process, pulled Edward from his thoughts. "More than I ever imagined," Edward replied with a smile. "There were moments when I thought our family was irreparably broken, and now look at them." Dr. Thompson nodded, following Edward's gaze to where Olivia and Jason were animatedly chatting with a group of potential donors. "They've come a long way. All of you have. It hasn't been easy, but your dedication to truth and forgiveness has borne beautiful fruit." At that moment, Jason approached them, his face radiant with enthusiasm. "Dad, you won't believe this. Mr. Johnson just committed to making an annual donation to the foundation. This will allow us to expand our support programs." Edward hugged his son, feeling a wave of pride. "That's wonderful, Jason. You and Olivia have done an incredible job." "We couldn't have done it without you, Dad," Jason said sincerely. "Your support, your guidance. Even when things were at their worst, you never stopped believing in us." Edward felt a lump form in his throat. "You are my family," he said simply. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." Olivia joined them, her eyes shining with emotion. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all, daughter," Edward replied, extending his arm to include her in the embrace. "We were just celebrating the success of the night." Olivia leaned into her father's embrace, an action that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "I still find it hard to believe how much things have changed," she murmured. "A year ago I was planning to destroy this family, and now you're an essential part of it," Edward completed. "I can't imagine our family without you." "Olivia!" Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were of happiness. "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me, on us." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a glass being gently tapped. Ethan was in the center of the hall, preparing to make an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and confident. "On behalf of the Anderson Taylor Foundation, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. But before we continue, there's something I'd like to share with you." Ethan paused, seeking Olivia with his gaze. When their eyes met, a smile formed on his face. "A year ago, I came to this house with a heart full of resentment and plans for revenge. I thought I knew the truth, that I had all the answers. But what I found here was something I never expected. A family. A family that, despite the mistakes of the past, had the courage to face the truth and the strength to forgive." Ethan walked towards where Edward, Olivia, and Jason were standing. "Edward, you taught me that integrity is not just about talking about doing the right thing, but acting accordingly, even when it's difficult. Jason, your capacity to forgive and your desire to make the world a better place are an inspiration to all of us." Then he turned to Olivia, taking her hand. "And Olivia, you showed me that true love is not about plans or revenge, but about accepting someone for who they really are, with all their imperfections. Ethan knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. "Olivia Taylor Anderson, would you do me the honor of marrying me, not as part of a plan, but because I love you, with all my heart, and I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you?" The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were on Olivia, whose face was a mixture of shock and emotion. Olivia looked at Ethan, then at Edward and Jason. In their eyes she saw love, support and acceptance. With tears running down her cheeks, she turned her gaze back to Ethan. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Ethan. I'll marry you." The room erupted in applause as Ethan placed the ring on Olivia's finger and stood up to kiss her. Edward and Jason were the first to approach to congratulate the couple, followed by a wave of excited guests. Amidst the celebration, Edward found himself momentarily alone, observing the scene before him. He saw Olivia and Ethan, radiant with happiness. He saw Jason, genuinely smiling as he hugged his sister. He saw Dr. Thompson, nodding approvingly from a corner. In that moment, Edward felt something close within him. The circle that had begun with secrets, lies, and plans for revenge now completed itself with love, forgiveness, and hope for the future. He approached his children and his future son-in-law, joining the group hug. "Welcome officially to the family, Ethan," he said, his voice charged with emotion. "Thank you, Edward," Ethan responded. "I promise to honor the trust you've placed in me." Olivia looked around at the people who now formed her family. "Who would have thought we'd end up like this?" she said with a soft laugh. "Life has mysterious ways of taking us exactly where we need to be," Edward replied. "Sometimes the path is difficult and painful, but if we keep our hearts open to love and forgiveness, we can find happiness in the most unexpected places." As the celebration continued around them, the Anderson-Taylor family remained united in their small circle, aware that they had overcome trials that would have destroyed many others. They had emerged stronger, more united, and above all, more loving. The future still had challenges to face, but now they knew they could face them together, as the family they were always meant to be. The months following the charity gala and Olivia and Ethan's engagement passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Anderson mansion, once again, was preparing for a grand event, the wedding. It was a sunny spring morning when Edward found himself in front of the mirror in his room, adjusting his tie. He reflected on the incredible journey that had brought his family to this moment. Just over a year ago, the idea of giving away his newly discovered daughter in marriage would have seemed insane. Now, he couldn't imagine a happier day. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Jason, already dressed in his best man suit. "Are you ready, Dad?" Jason asked, a genuine smile on his face. Edward nodded, feeling a wave of paternal pride. "More than ready. How's your sister?" "Nervous? Excited? I think she's been through every possible emotion this morning," Jason replied with a soft laugh. "But above all, she's happy, really happy." Together, father and son headed towards Olivia's room. Upon entering, the sight left them breathless. Olivia, radiant in her wedding dress, was the very image of happiness. "You look beautiful, daughter," Edward said, his voice breaking with emotion. Olivia turned to them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Dad. I never thought I'd have this. A family, a father to walk me down the aisle. It's more than I ever dreamed of." Jason approached his sister, taking her hands. "You deserve it all, Liv. You've come a long way. We all have. I'm proud to call you my sister." The three of them melted into a hug, a moment of family unity that symbolized everything they had overcome together. The ceremony was intimate and emotional. In the mansion's gardens, decorated with spring flowers and soft lights, Olivia walked down the aisle on Edward's arm. Ethan waited for her, his face a mixture of love and amazement. When the time came for the vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. "Olivia," Ethan began, his voice trembling slightly. We started this journey with anger and desire for revenge in our hearts, but along the way, we found something much more valuable: true love, forgiveness, and a family. I promise to love you every day of my life, to be your partner in good times and bad, and to build a future together filled with love and hope." Olivia, with tears running down her cheeks, responded, "Ethan, you taught me that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. You showed me that our past doesn't have to define our future. I promise to always be by your side, to face any challenge together, and to fill our days with love, laughter, and adventures." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the joy in the air was palpable. The guests erupted in applause as the couple sealed their union with a kiss. At the reception that followed, Edward observed his family with a heart full of gratitude. He saw Olivia and Ethan, lost in their own world of happiness. He saw Jason, animatedly chatting with some guests about the Foundation's latest projects, and he saw Dr. Thompson raising her glass in a silent toast to him. As the music played and couples filled the dance floor, Edward found himself reflecting on the incredible journey they had undertaken. From dark secrets and plans for revenge, they had emerged stronger, more united, and above all, more loving. He approached Olivia and Ethan, who were resting for a moment from their first dance as husband and wife. "I'm so proud of you two," he said, embracing them. "You've faced so many adversities and come out ahead. Your love is a testament that there's always hope, even in the darkest moments." Olivia smiled at her father, her eyes shining with happiness. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for not giving up on us, for teaching us the true meaning of forgiveness and unconditional love." Ethan nodded, shaking Edward's hand. "You gave us a second chance, all of us. I promise to honor that trust every day of my life." Jason joined them, bringing a bottle of champagne and glasses. "I think it's time for a family toast," he announced with a smile. As he poured the champagne, Edward looked around at the family he had built through trials and tribulations. He raised his glass, his voice charged with emotion. "To love, which has the power to heal the deepest wounds. To forgiveness, which frees us and allows us to grow. And to family, not just the one we're given, but the one we choose and build day by day. May our future be filled with love, understanding, and joy." "To family," they all chorused, clinking their glasses. As the celebration continued around them, Edward felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. They had faced their demons, healed old wounds, and emerged stronger and more united than ever. The future stretched out before them, full of promises and possibilities. And although they knew there would be challenges to come, they now had the certainty that they could face anything, as long as they were together. The night progressed, full of laughter, dancing, and love, and at the heart of it all was the Anderson-Taylor family, a living testament that even from the darkest shadows can emerge the brightest light of love and redemption. 5 years had passed since Olivia and Ethan's wedding. The Anderson mansion, once the stage for secrets and conspiracies, now overflowed with life and joy. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the family had gathered for their traditional weekly lunch. In the spacious garden, under the shade of an old oak tree, Edward observed the scene with a heart full of gratitude. Olivia and Ethan were playing with their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, a little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, who was the spitting image of her mother, Jason, who had recently announced his engagement to Sophia, a social worker he had met through the foundation, was preparing the grill. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Olivia's voice pulled Edward from his reflections. She had approached, with little Emma in her arms. Edward smiled, extending his arms to receive his granddaughter. "Son, I was thinking about how fortunate we are," he replied, as Emma settled into his lap. "About how, despite everything, we've reached this moment." Olivia sat next to him, her face reflecting a mixture of nostalgia and happiness. "Sometimes I find it hard to believe how much things have changed. 6 years ago, I would never have imagined having all this. A family, a daughter, a purpose. Life has mysterious ways of taking us exactly where we need to be," Edward said, repeating the words he had said years ago, on the night of Olivia's engagement. Even though the path may be difficult, if we keep our hearts open to love and forgiveness, we can find happiness in the most unexpected places. Ethan approached, bringing a tray with lemonade. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" he asked with a smile. "About the past. The present? The future," Olivia replied, taking her husband's hand. Jason joined them, wiping his hands on an apron. "The food will be ready in a few minutes," he announced. "How about we make a toast?" As Jason served the lemonade in glasses, Edward looked around at the family he had built through trials and tribulations. His heart swelled with pride and love. "I'd like to propose a toast," Edward said, raising his glass. "To the path we've traveled, to the lessons we've learned, and to the love that has kept us united through it all. To family," Olivia added, her eyes shining with emotion. "To forgiveness," Ethan said, squeezing his wife's hand. "To the future," Jason completed, smiling at Sophia, who had just arrived and was joining the family circle. "To life," little Emma exclaimed, imitating the adults with her juice glass, causing laughter from everyone. As they clinked their glasses, Edward felt a deep sense of fullness. The circle that had begun with secrets and revenge now closed with love, forgiveness, and hope. The afternoon progressed with laughter, conversations, and shared memories. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky with golden and pink hues, Edward found himself walking through the gardens with Jason. "You know, Dad," Jason began, his voice laden with emotion, "I've never properly thanked you." Edward looked at his adopted son curiously. "Thank me for what?" "For everything," Jason replied. "For adopting me when I was a child, for giving me a home and a family, and above all, for your strength throughout this whole situation with Olivia. Many parents would have crumbled, but you kept us together." Edward felt a lump form in his throat. "Jason, my son, you have nothing to thank me for. You and Olivia are the best thing that's ever happened to me. You've taught me more about love and forgiveness than I could ever have taught you." They stopped in front of a small pond, watching as the last rays of sun reflected on the water. "You know, sometimes I think about how things would have been if we hadn't discovered the truth," Jason reflected. "If Olivia and I had gotten married without knowing we were siblings." Edward nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "The truth can be painful, but it's always the right path. Look at all the good that has come from it, the foundation, your engagement to Sophia, the family we've built." "You're right," Jason agreed. "It's just that sometimes I wonder, would fate have united us anyway? Would we have found a way to be a family, even without knowing the truth?" Edward smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I believe that true love, whether familial or romantic, always finds its way. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have been more difficult, but I think in the end, we would have reached this point somehow." They returned to the family gathering, where Olivia was telling a story that was making everyone laugh. Ethan was capturing the moment with his camera, while Emma ran among the adults, her childish laughter filling the air. Edward observed the scene, feeling a deep gratitude. They had been through dark times, faced painful truths, and overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable, but in the end, love and forgiveness had triumphed. Night fell on the Anderson mansion, but instead of the shadows that once inhabited it, it was now full of light and warmth. The family gathered around a bonfire, sharing stories, dreams, and plans for the future. As Edward looked around at the smiling faces of his children, his son-in-law, his future daughter-in-law, and his granddaughter, he knew they had created something precious and lasting, a legacy of love, forgiveness, and unity that would endure far beyond their lives. "Grandpa?" Little Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Tell us a story." Edward smiled, drawing his granddaughter onto his lap. "How about I tell you the story of our family?" he proposed, looking at the others. "The story of how love can overcome any obstacle, of how truth, though painful, can set you free, and of how forgiveness can heal the deepest wounds." Everyone nodded, settling in to listen. And so, under the starry sky, Edward began to narrate their story, a story of secrets and revelations, of pain and healing, of loss and redemption, but above all, a story of love, a love that had survived the hardest tests and had emerged stronger, purer, and truer than ever. As the words flowed, Edward saw reflected in the eyes of his family the same love and unity they had forged through their experiences, and he knew, with unshakable certainty, that no matter what the future held for them, they would face every challenge together, as the family they were always destined to be. In that moment, under the stars, surrounded by the love of his family, Edward Anderson felt that his life had reached its highest purpose. He had learned that true legacy is not measured in wealth or power, but in the love we leave behind and the lives we touch. And so, in the warmth of that night, the story of the Anderson-Taylor family came to an end, but their legacy of love, forgiveness, and unity would continue to live on, inspiring future generations to believe in the transformative power of true love.